For the 60S conversion, we need to remove the DC-DC converter so that we can change a couple of components inside of that. We don't actually need to remove the entire PDU. We can just remove the DC-DC. So to remove these 12-volt leads, I find that it's easiest to remove this bracket. So I just loosen these 4 bolts and we can unplug the fan. Okay, so now that the bolts are out, we can just remove this bracket and we can pull the fan back, and that just makes it a little bit easier to get to these bolts. We'll need to remove this red rubber boot that's covering the 12-volt, and then we can just take a 10mm socket. Here's the point where if you haven't disconnected the 12-volt battery, it's going to spark. Okay, next we can loosen these 10mm bolts, but don't remove them yet because it'll help us keep the DC-DC converter in place while we remove the ones on the bottom. Next, we're going to take and remove these 2 connectors. They're actually attached together, so you only need to remove the blue one. To do that, you're going to take the flathead that comes with the kit, and there's actually a plastic tab that's kind of clear, and it's next to the blue connector, and you're going to basically stick this flathead down into that, and that's going to remove the tab so that you can pull this connector up, and then it will just come off like that. Here's the tab that you're pushing out. You're basically pushing that tab out of the way. And then you need to remove the 2 tabs here just to get this wire harness to where it's not attached to the DC-DC converter. We can just set that out of the way. Next, we're going to take a 10mm. The shorter the socket is, the better, and then we'll put it on an extension. This will help us navigate around the wire harness here. We can start with the middle bolt, and again, it's directly below this top one. And I like to put the socket on top of the wire harness, so I'm between the aluminum case. I'm below the aluminum case, and I'm above this wire harness. And there's the bolt. And we'll remove these bottom ones all the way. The next bolt, again, is directly underneath here. In this case, I go below the wire harness. Okay, and then finally, our last bolt. Okay, now we'll remove the top 3 bolts, and that will remove the DC-DC from the PDU. Okay, so now we should just be able to pull the DC-DC off, remove it from the PDU. For the 60S FoMoCo kit, we need to actually change 2 of the surface mount resistors inside of the DC-DC converter. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove these 4 Phillips head screws. I've already loosened them. They can be a little bit difficult, so you might need to actually push down real hard. They're very easy to strip out, so make sure if they're tight that you're pushing down real hard so they don't cam out. Okay, with the 4 screws off, we need to remove this tab just to help make the cover easier to take off. And now we're going to just lift up on the cover, and it's going to pick up, and we're going to kind of just rotate it off to the side here. So what we'll do is we need to find this circuit right here, and you can see on this circuit that there are 2 black resistors. We need to desolder those resistors. So the easiest way to remove these components is to take your iron and clean it off, and then we're going to take and put some solder on there, and we're going to just drop this in and just flood this with solder like that, and we're going to just make sure we get both sides like that. And you can take a tweezer here and just pick this up. We're not reusing that, so just discard it wherever. And we'll do the same thing with this other guy there. So now we have both of the parts off, and we've got a bunch of solder there. So to get all of this extra solder off, I recommend using a solder wick. You can buy this on Amazon. And what we're going to do is take this solder wick and just kind of touch it on there. It's going to suck all of the solder off those joints. You can see that like there. Okay. Before we put the parts on, the solder wick typically uses a corrosive flux, so we need to clean that off, and we do that with rubbing alcohol. So I'm taking 91% isopropyl. It doesn't matter if this gets on the circuit board. Circuit boards are typically cleaned with this beforehand, and I'm just going to clean this flux off here just until the board doesn't look brown. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the bag in the kit that has these resistors in it, and we're gonna take, there's 2 extras, so there's 1 extra of each resistor, and I'm just dumping these out off screen, and we're gonna get 1 of each value. The first value is gonna say 1332, and we'll just set that on screen here. And the second value is gonna say 8251, and we will set that right there. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna solder these here to where the one that says 1332 is going to be here, closer to this capacitor, and the one that says 8251 is going to be right there in the middle. Note that right here it looks like there's a short, and when we solder it there will be a short there, but that's just because there's a trace between these 2 pads, so don't worry if there's a short there when you're done. So what we'll do is we'll take our soldering iron, and then we're going to take and clean off our soldering tip again and just put a little bit of solder on it. And we're going to just put solder on one side of each resistor there like that. And then we're going to take our 1332 and we're going to solder it onto one pad like that. And then we're going to take the one that says 8251 and also solder it on like that. Okay. And now we will go ahead and solder the other side. This mod keeps the DC-DC converter from turning off when your pack voltage exceeds 217 volts. So if you don't do this modification and you run 60S, the battery light will come on when the battery is fully charged. Again, the short on this side is okay, but we can't have a short on the other side. This is already shorted, so that's fine. After we get the resistors soldered on, we'll reinstall the front cover. And there's 2 things you need to make note of. One, the metal flange here is going to go all the way against the metal here. There's a slot here that's not the correct slot. It's actually going to go behind this connector. And the second thing is that you need to make sure that the edge on these black inserts is it's out enough so that you can pop it in later. Make sure these 2 grommets are on the outside, like that. So if you look at this here, you can still see this rim, and over here, both of these black grommets, the edge is on the outside. So we'll go ahead and pop that back in, and then we'll just reinstall these 4 Phillips head screws. Okay, so now we can reinstall the DC-DC converter back into the car. To reinstall the DC-DC converter, we're going to just take it and set it in the magnesium hole there. And then one thing I'll point out is that before I put this back on, I went ahead and removed all these clips so that this harness is free. It just makes it a lot easier to reinstall the 3 bolts on the bottom. The first thing we'll do though is we'll stick a bolt here in the middle, and we'll just loosely thread it in, and then just leave that loose. And the orange colored bolt head goes here. And now that we've removed this wire harness, these bottom 3 are very easy to install. Okay, now we'll tighten all 6 bolts, and now we'll just reinstall all of these plastic tabs. And we will reinstall this connector, and it just slides on from the top, like that. The last thing we need to do is reconnect the 12-volt cables to the back of the DC-DC. The white one goes on the bottom, the black one's on top here. Okay, now we're going to slide this red boot back over the positive 12 volts, and then we're going to reattach our PDU fan. And finally, we'll plug the fan back in. In this car, the connector shrouding has been broken off, and it's really important that this fan works with this FoMoCo mod because we're pushing this quite a bit harder. So if these are loose, you can actually take a screwdriver and you can actually tighten these spade connectors so that they're really snug on here so that this stays connected.